For 90 days, I drew Chris Hemsworth every day to see how much better I could get. This video covers the last 30 days of that journey, so days 60 through 90. If you missed the first two videos, there's a link in the description below. But over the course of the first 60 days, I improved drastically. My day 60 drawing was incredibly better than the day 1 drawing. But these drawings took me about 6 or 7 hours to complete. I was using what's called the grid approach, where you draw little grids on the piece of paper that you're going to draw with and on the reference photo, and from there you know exactly where each feature is going to be. This lends itself to an incredible amount of detail that you can put into the drawings, which also means an incredible amount of time. Because I was so happy with my day 60 drawing, I decided to move away from the grid approach and try doing sketches, which is completely different. Instead of trying to make the drawing as realistic as possible, I wanted now to get an air of who Chris was in a drawing as quickly as possible. So I gave myself 30 to 40 minutes every day to just sketch Chris and try and get him right. So I've tried to transition from drawing a 7-hour sketch of Chris Hemsworth to drawing a 1-hour sketch of Chris Hemsworth. And the progress has been really slow. I find myself caring too much about little details and still spending 2 to 3 hours on the drawings. So I've set a rule for myself: if I don't finish the drawing in 1 hour, whatever I get to in an hour is where I'll stop. Instead of the grid approach, I used, I don't know the official term for it, but I used I'm gonna call it a plus approach. So I divided my piece of paper into a big plus, and using the plus, you can also draw, or you can visually see a plus on your subject, and you can say, okay, this dividing line is going to be on his eyes. In the case of Chris, in a lot of the reference photos, it was the top of his eye. There's about the same distance from there to the top of his hair as there is from there to his chin. So that way you have a general proportion, and then you split the nose in half, so the face in half vertically. And that way you can kind of keep track of all the facial features, make sure it's symmetrical, and you have a general guide, a very loose guide of what the proportions should be. Because it's less defined, it also allows for a lot more variance. And I noticed this quickly when I started drawing. I drew a lot of oblong Chris's with a super long, skinny face. I drew a couple of very wide faces. Drawing has become quite the toss-up. Some days I get the likeness down, and others, not so much. For example, here was today. And here was yesterday. Although this one did take me a couple hours. And the one today took me probably 30 minutes. So I still need to get a lot better at the quick sketches. I think with more time, I can get the likeness down, but the quick ones still aren't looking great. And his features themselves were in the wrong places. So there was a new challenge here. I'd gotten decent at shading, but now I needed to be able to get the features right. I hadn't focused on getting the features in the right places at all because I was using the grid approach, which tells you exactly where they are. Now I needed to be able to see a picture of Chris and be able to visually put that on a piece of paper and know exactly where all the features would go, where his nose would be, eyes, lips, etc. And it was very interesting. Up to this point, I felt like each drawing I made was an improvement upon the last. But during the first bit of these last 30 days, the improvement wasn't as clear. One day I'd draw a picture of Chris I was fairly happy with, and the next day I'd make one that looked nothing like him. The variance was huge, but I was still really enjoying the drawing process. So even when I drew something that didn't look at all like him, I was still having fun. After 15 more days, something interesting and kind of weird happened. I stopped needing a reference photo. I knew exactly what Chris looked like without having to look at him. I knew exactly where his eyes were, what his eyebrows looked like, the fact that one eyebrow's shape is a slightly different from the other. I knew where the creases of his smiles were. I knew that one of them is more pointed than the other is more curved. I knew exactly which creases he had on his forehead. In all, I knew Chris. I knew Chris's face better than I probably know my own face, because I'd been studying it at this point for 75 days. This made drawing really easy because I didn't need to pull up a reference of him. I just needed a piece of paper and a pencil and 30 minutes. and I'd draw a plus on the piece of paper, and then I would know what he was supposed to look like. And at this point, the drawings did start to improve again, because I think when I wasn't so focused on recreating an image I was seeing in front of me, rather on creating this idea, or rather on bringing out the essence of who Chris was. If you've watched Chris's movies or interviews with him, he seems like a very happy person. He's very animated, dynamic, and that comes through, especially through his eyes. I've been watching this portrait drawing show from England where they get 9 people to draw portraits of famous people and they essentially judge them. It's like a cooking competition, but for portrait drawing. And it's been really impressive to see the life that they can bring to the drawings. They call it the likeness, which is beyond just the shape and more like if you can capture the very essence of the person. So I'm going to try to focus on that today and try and really get Chris's essence. Not sure how to do that. I'm guessing it's mostly in the eyes. We'll find out. So for the last 15 days, instead of focusing on individual facial features and making sure to get all the proportions right and worrying about that, I focused only on trying to get his character out through the drawing, his essence. And a big focus on that, as I mentioned, is in the eyes. I spent a lot of time getting the eyes right. And I started reframing my drawings. Instead of starting with the outer features or the facial shape, I would draw the plus and start with the eyes. And everything else would be in reference to the eyes. I would build the face around the eyes. And a consequence of this is I noticed the variance in the quality was going down over time. I was really happy with the drawings I was making. And even if the facial features weren't completely right, I felt like I was starting to get an essence of who Chris was through the drawings pretty consistently. At the end of these 90 days, I'm happy with my ability to draw a very realistic approach, a very realistic Chris Hemsworth, using a grid and spending hours getting all the detail and shading right. And I'm also fairly happy with my ability to just spend 30 minutes and draw a quick sketch. I don't know if I can draw anyone else or anything else because I've only been drawing Chris Hemsworth for 90 days. But if by some miracle, Chris, you're watching this and you want a portrait done of you, a fairly mediocre portrait done of you, hit me up.